Curiosity about the universe beyond our planetary sphere has engaged us from the beginning of the human species, but only a specially trained few can discover information to satisfy this curiosity, and more immediate questions, closer to home, occupy our attention most of the time. And so, Food for Thought Productions is pleased to present the specially trained and experienced Helen Colton, family counselor, author, and lecturer, to share her research on a subject that concerns many of us and is an issue that often generates considerable differences of opinion. Here is Ms. Colton with our producer, Lee Baker, to talk about families, past, present, and future.
It's so nice to have you here.
Thank you, Liz.
On our series, because I've been a fan for years.
That's nice to hear.
Now, I've been wanting to know, what is the meaning of the term family values? What does that refer to?
It's a wonderful question. The term came into use about 25 years ago. It was inaugurated by the conservatives, the religious right, and it was meant as a political tool, saying in effect, families with values that they like, that they agree with, are good families. And what they didn't say was that we don't agree with other families or alternative family structures, they are no good. So it started actually as a political tool with the religious right and the conservatives. They never have defined what they mean by family values.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, right. As a teacher of family relations and family values, I have taken that they mean obedience to authority, obedience to parents, obedience to the church, obedience to the government, to the state. If you are obedient to authority, parents, church, state, then you have family values. I consider it absolutely unrealistic in today's world, where the structure of family is changing all over the world. We used to have what they call a nuclear family. Does anybody know what that means? I'll give you the definition. It was originated by a sociologist at Harvard named Talcott Parsons. Nuclear family meant traditional family structure from the past, parents and children. Okay. Well, for many years, that's not what family structure has been. Family structure is changing every day. Judges are making rulings. Legal decisions are coming down. And the people who believe, quote, in family values, traditional, archaic family values, are the people who are not accepting the reality of behavior in the world today. Family structure is changing fast, permanently, forever.
Now, why was the traditional family structure, how did that come about? That was more or less when families were living and working on farms, right?
Oh, sure. Also, all human behaviorally is dependent on three factors. Nobody ever talks about the time, the place, and the situation. The time and the place and the situation of the agrarian past is very different. That's when families worked together. They went out and worked in the farms. There was no industry, and so on. Today, modern technology is evolving so that we are in a very different time, place, and situation. Members of families live all over the world. They live in different cities. We have bi-coastal marriages. So the reality of time, place, and situation is very different from the past. Typically, in the past, you had parents and children, and sometimes grandparents. Okay?
Right.
It's all very different.
Well, the extended family.
Yeah.
And that made a kind of a support group that isn't available now.
Oh, and how? Huh. But families had lots of children. How was one mother, one human being, able to give time and attention, strokes, and taking care of a lot of kids? Well, they were helped a lot by extended families. The spinster aunt, the grandparents who lived with them, and they shared mothering tasks.
Parenting.
Yeah.
Right.
Right,
Right.
Yeah.
Now, going back to the traditional family values that you were describing earlier, and the authorities that were to be obeyed, That was the Bible instead of our democratic constitution.
Sure. All the rules and regulations that have come down through history have originated in two ways, through religious principles and through government needs. I'm going to tell you about masturbation, for example. I've written several books of sex education. The taboo against masturbation, how did it begin? Ancient governments wanted large populations to have armies of aggrandizement to go and conquer other nations. Religions wanted large families to propagate their power. So they ruled many years ago, and people have followed this slavishly for centuries, that masturbation was taboo. I happen to consider masturbation a very good health measure.
Well, so did the, what was it, the
Surgeon General?
Surgeon General.
Of course, Jocelyn Elders, fired
Right.
by Clinton. Well, I don't think now he'd fire anybody for using that word. What she advocated is that we teach as part of sex education courses, I consider them part of health and biology courses, masturbation techniques, but more than that, give young people approval to take care of their own needs when they have sex drives, okay? So we're in a process of tremendous change. Two aspects of family life I think we have to define. One is the form of family life, the other is the content of family life. Forms are changing. Every week I hear of something new about family structure. The judges have ruled, one case recently in LA, a man who was gay lived with a woman, and he gave his sperm for her to father a child. Okay. She had the child. The couple split up after some years. The judge gave custody of that baby to the man, the single gay man at that point, because she considered him a better parent than the mother.
The judge.
Yeah, the judge, family court judge. Okay. One small example of how we're getting new laws and new customs all the time on the form of family life. Now we have this great drive for sexual companionate partners to be declared legal spouses. That will grow, and before too many years, it'll be absolutely accepted everywhere in this country and everywhere throughout the world. We have social indications that it will be accepted. The form of family life is changing.
The people who consist of the family.
Family, right.
People.
Right, absolutely. And they'll be legalized with all kinds of benefits and rights, marital rights.
Well, what are some of the configurations that exist now?
Oh, well, you have typically two gay parents, male or female, who can adopt a child legally. That's not biologically theirs, for example. You have older people who are adopting younger people who may be in their 40s and 50s to become part of their legal family. These are examples of some of the things that are happening.
Mm-hmm. And the reasons, what will expedite really being realistic about what a family is today?
The form of a family, and we'll talk about the content in a minute. People who make protests against the status quo. That's where it comes from. All social change begins with protest against the status quo. Laws change because people protest the status quo. The freedom to protest is very important. Historically, every change in law, well, look what happened this week in Yugoslavia. The protest of the population got rid of Milosevic. Protest, the right to keep it alive, is very important.
Mm-hmm. So in other words, if you're going to be a member, a citizen of a democracy, and we're fortunate that we have that status here,
right?
Then you have an obligation to move things along to where they're realistic and fair, right?
Absolutely, to look at the reality of how people are acting, behaving, speaking, rather than going back and saying that's the way they should be because in the past that's the way they were. Absolutely a nonsensical way to live. To me, the people who are the most advanced and the great social contributors are those who say, what's the reality of human behavior today? What do we then do to advance that?
Well, those rules that were established 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago, they made sense in the context of the time.
Exactly right. Time, place, and situation. They were wise in that time. They are not wise today any longer.
Well, they just don't fit.
Yeah.
Well, don't you think that people who are directly affected would be the most active? That is, a gay person would be most active in trying to establish legal status for family and so forth. But what would be the incentive for someone who is not affected, a heterosexual person?
The incentive would be if you are a tolerant, humanistic, good human being, you want the human being, the human race, to have as much joy, pleasure, responsible joy and pleasure and freedoms as possible. Whether or not you personally are part of such a family, I want the human race to advance. I think that's their right in evolution, to advance to greater joy, pleasure, freedom, responsible freedom, and so on. So I'm just a good human being who lives with generosity of spirit. I want everybody in the world to have the goodies of life. It depends on what we inherit as human mammals. What were we born with? What needs, drives, hungers do we have? How do we go about fulfilling them? I don't want any law or any rule that says you are deprived of the basic human mammalian rights with which you were born.
One of the arguments that come from the real activists, the gay community, is that they want responsibilities that, to go with legal marriage. In other words, when there's a split up, there's nothing, there are no guarantees for the injured party, so we say.
Sure.
And then, of course, the ones that I'm trying to think of arguments why an ordinary person should be concerned about this. And I think one of the most vulnerable would be the children in a family that hasn't been sanctioned as a legal unit.
Right. I happen to believe the state should enter as little as possible into human relationships, except for the protection of children, the helpless, the elderly, not capable of making rational decisions. The state should enter as little as possible into human relationships.
How do you feel about, well, family planning?
Oh, all for it. I think a monument, one of the greatest people who ever lived in our society is Margaret Sanger, who started Planned Parenthood. I feel very strongly about it. I would like more good family planning so less women have to resort to abortion. I'm for pro-choice, but it's still a trauma to go through an abortion, even if you're pro-choice. I'd like to save women that trauma. For heaven's sake, take care of yourselves when you have sex. Don't have unwanted pregnancies. So, I'm all for it, but also teaching women, too many of them leave it to men who are careless about it or indifferent to it. Take care of your own body. Own your own body. Take responsibility for your own body. Well, don't have an unwanted pregnancy.
But isn't it kind of unromantic to worry about those practical issues?
I think it's more romantic to be in charge of your life and to be in charge of not having unwanted consequences. I consider that very romantic, okay? That's my point of view.
What do you think would be the best way to help teenagers avoid getting into trouble of pregnancies and disease and so forth?
Educate them about the unwanted consequences, the terrible lives of many teenage mothers who don't know how to take care of their children, who may live with a parent under crowded conditions. The parents are disapproving of what they're doing. Teach them the consequences of their acts. This is what can happen. Okay? You will have some social disapproval. Your whole life will be changed by an unwanted pregnancy. You may not finish high school. You may never go to college. Your earning ability will be less for all the rest of your life without a college degree. Okay? Teach people the consequences of their actions. Part of all teaching. What happens if you engage in this act?
Right. Well, why is it that there's such opposition to that kind of education? In other words, there is this tremendous drive to make the only teaching abstinence.
That's because we have the conservatives who would like their values and their beliefs to prevail legally in the entire culture. Unrealistic. Okay? So a lot of it comes from people who resist social change, the ones who typically have a conservative stance which says, we want the status quo, we don't want any changes. And
we don't want any changes, like if we're the ruling class, we don't want that disturbed.
You're mentioning the ruling class is interesting. Throughout history, talking about the forms of family life, throughout history, the ruling class, the leaders of governments, the tycoons, the wealthy, they have had alternative lifestyles. You have people in countries who've had harems, lots of women, okay? They've had mistresses in many, many cultures. They have had rules for themselves which were different from the rules for the middle class and the poor. If the middle class and the poor followed those rules, they were legally guilty of adultery, they were perverts, they were social pariahs. The rich have always taken to themselves great privileges, great perks for what they want.
Great freedom.
Great freedom. So we've had all kinds of alternative, quote, family structures historically that leaders of government and the rich have taken unto themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about a couple who really prefer not to be legally married? They want to live together and keep their finances separate and their choices separate.
I'm all for it. That's their right to do what they want. We have no right to say you need a piece of paper to cohabit. I have a relationship with a man for 18 years. I will never marry. He doesn't want to marry. We happen to live across the street from each other. We travel all over the world. I love it in hotels. We don't have to pretend to be Mr. and Mrs. We can go under our own names. Everywhere there's acceptance of people being together, not being married. Okay?
Well, what precautions what kind of arrangements should they make so that one is not going to be victimized when there's a split?
Or they can have a prenuptial agreement. That makes very good sense to me.
It wouldn't be prenuptial. It would just be it would be legal contract.
Yeah, legal contract.
Legal
right, you're right. They're not married, not prenuptial. But in effect, it would be the same as prenuptial. If we split up, and lots of them do split up,
Right.
all right, the whole aspect of marriage is on the wane throughout the world. Predicted 150 years ago by economic historians. They said, and it's coming to pass, when women go out to work and can support themselves, the institution of marriage will slowly wither away. And that's what's happening around the world, okay? Sweden, many other countries, more and more people are not legally married. Women go out of the house and can support themselves. Catholic Italy allows divorces now. Catholic Ireland allows divorces. Okay? And the next thing that will follow in an evolutionary sense, that people will not get married, don't have to be divorced, and they can damn well do as they choose, and it will have legal approval.
So you think that's a good thing, or that's just the inevitable?
Well, it's inevitable and a good thing both. I think that change is very desirable. You can't avoid change. You and I are changed between the time we came to the studio today and the time we leave, a different time, place, and situation. We've exchanged ideas. We are changed people. Change is built into the law of nature. You can't help it. Okay? But you want change that's responsible and not exploitive of other human beings. A responsible change. And you can't help it. As you breathe, you're changing.
I see. So in other words, if it's inevitable, just go with it and make the best of whatever.
Understand it, and don't deride it, and don't try to hold on to the past. Let me give you an example here. Family life. I just am reading a book called For Their Own Good by a German psychoanalyst, Alice Miller, about the horrible childhood of people who became mass murderers and Adolf Hitler. What a list of horrors that parents did to children historically. They beat children like animals to beat discipline into them, to take willfulness out of the child. So a lot of the family values say it's okay to spank children. The Bible says spank children.
Right.
Okay,
Spare
it's
the
okay.
rod and
Yeah,
spoil the
child.
child.
Right. Okay, that is so cruel. That if you hit somebody, their nervous system fills with chemicals for fight or flight. You hit a child, that child can't take flight and it can't fight, and you're treating it like an animal and filling it with rage and resentment. You're creating the future barbarians and violence. Okay. Now, here's a wonderful example. Do you remember Frances Farmer, the actress?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
And her autobiography, this is what she
Now,
said.
she was the movie star.
Yeah, and she was in a mental institution. Her mother put her there.
Her mother put her there.
Okay. This is
Right.
from her autobiography. This is the values, the family values, to get back to, of the past. This is how some people behave, family values, nonsense. In her autobiography, the late actress Frances Farmer wrote poignantly of a family into whose orbit she moved during the last years of her life. Quote, "To compare them and my blood family was to list antonyms. They loved, mine hated. They believed, mine destroyed. They respected, mine mocked. They repaired, mine tore asunder." Isn't that a sad quote? And that is the family values of many people from the past brought into the present. Now, we talk about the form of family life. Let's talk about the content. What's a good content of family life? We need strokes. We need validation.
What do you mean by stroke?
I don't mean physical cerebral strokes. A stroke is any unit of interaction between two people which validates the other person, respects the other person. A small part of it is touch strokes. That's a small part. We have time and attention strokes. Chief complaint of marriage counseling. The wife comes in and says, "My husband doesn't pay attention to me. He doesn't hear me, doesn't listen to me." She's talking about time and attention strokes.
She's missing.
That she's missing. Response strokes, she feels unheard by her husband. Okay. Awareness strokes. I'm aware of all the preparation you put into preparing for this program, Lee. That's different from saying thank you. That's a ritual. Awareness stroke says, I am aware of the work you put into it. Someone invites you for dinner. I'm aware they went to the store. They planned the menu. They shopped and waited in line to pay, brought the fruits and vegetables and meats home, washed everything, all the work they did in preparing. That's an awareness stroke. It goes below the surface of thank you. I call
Now,
it,
if you offer to help with the dishes, that's a stroke to the host.
absolutely. Okay.
Yes.
There's a recognition stroke. If you and I passed each other in the hall and we didn't bother to say hi or hello, I would lack a recognition stroke from you. A principal of a school walks down the hall, passes students in his school, and just looks straight ahead and never says anything. He could say hi, give them a recognition stroke. Right? All of life is about strokes. No matter who you are, how high up, you want strokes. They validate you, they respect you, and I think the content of good family life is that the people in it get a lot of different kinds of strokes. This is valuable information. I hope the people watching this start learning about giving strokes. Everybody in the world wants strokes, not ritual thank yous, but
Well,
something
it's-
deeper than that.
It's little kindnesses,
Thoughtfulness,
recognition,
yeah.
and little
Right.
kindnesses.
Empathy strokes. A kid is upset, so the mother says, "Oh, well, why do you want to be upset for? Don't be upset. That's not important." That's not what the child wants to hear. The child wants to hear, "Gee, I'm sorry that you're upset by this situation. You feel like talking about it?" That's an empathy stroke. That's a listening stroke.
Now, there's a lot more damage done to family members by family members.
Oh, yes.
And yet, family values mean that you have to respect and treasure the family and so forth. I had occasion to go out to the women's prison recently where they have an arts program. It's a rehabilitation center. And the people there, these women who were there, were creating stories and acting them out and so forth about their lives and so forth. And the obvious message there is you shouldn't go back to that family.
Uh-huh. Absolutely right.
So that it means really what you're saying is that you need to actually assemble a family for yourself.
A family that will
be
take care of
supportive.
your needs, respect you,
Right.
stroke you, validate you, take care of your needs. They don't have to be blood families. We don't need DNA families anymore. We don't have to be blood related. We just have to be related humanistically. And oh, absolutely, those people should never go back to their destructive families at all.
Right. So in other words, this is a whole new concept, that blood is thicker than water.
Yeah,
It's kind
and
of
as I say
outdated.
in an article of mine, blood also creates the sludge of family relationship.
Yes.
And it can be destructive, yeah.
Right.
I had an article called Reciprocity of Education. You know what studies have shown? The families where the parents and children get along the best of all is when the parents have kept up their education throughout life, that they do not go back to what I learned as a kid, what I was taught when I was growing up. What is the education, the information today? That the families that kept up their information to the present had less difficulties with their children.
Right.
And that's my personal experience.
Right. Now, parenting is a really difficult activity.
And
I think
how?
everybody agrees with that. But there isn't any preparation or testing or requirements for that,
Right,
as there is for driving a car.
right. Margaret Mead
Could that
advocated
be-
that we have education for parenting. I don't think it'll ever come about. And that people who decide to have children must first complete a course in parenting education and get a certificate that says they have completed this course, they now can have a child. Well, that will never happen, but that's what Margaret Mead many years ago presented as the ideal. We absolutely need parenting education. You know when it begins? In kindergarten. Children
so?
can be taught, for example, when they play with dolls and stuff, they can be taught. I'm a great advocate of population control. A lot of problems people aren't taking a look at. We are overpopulated. The density of population can make you crazy. Okay? Children are taught no family has more than 2 children. That can begin in nursery school when they play house. It's so easy to teach them new values and new beliefs.
Right, right. So anyway, you feel that there is a constant shift and changing of families as the world changes.
Absolutely, and it'll continue forever.
And it's going to continue, and so we have to do what?
Be open-minded, be tolerant, not be afraid of change, and say, I will understand the change. I will update my knowledge and my attitudes towards change in human behavior.
Oh, well, that's great. That's a great note to end on because
Okay.
we've run out of time, and I want to thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee. Good.
Thank you.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.